building scenarios. How do you do this? I think it's fairly straightforward when it comes to simple non-branching scenarios, because all you have to do is work with the SME to get possible situations. Or sometimes, you don't even need the SME because the content itself is so it gives you so many interesting possibilities. But how do we generally go about? So I'll very quickly take you through the planning, design, and development of scenarios. As with any other training initiative, your choice of scenarios will depend on the learning objectives. So the first and the most important step is to analyze the learning objectives and see if the kind of objective that you're hoping to accomplish by the end of your training is best served by using scenarios. And if so, what kind of scenarios? Will branching scenarios work best or non-branching scenarios work best? So, based on our experience with various kinds of courses and projects in learning design, this is a best practice that we can use branching scenarios for learning objectives which are at a higher Bloom's level. So anything equal to or Bloom's level 3, because that's when you start the application. You begin to teach learners at the level of application. And then you again take decisions on should they be exploratory scenarios, should they be normative, or do you want predictive scenarios? Again, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And just a quick note, the above two categories, A and B, are not really mutually exclusive. It's just that you might want to make notes for yourself when you're analyzing your content. If you feel that there is a point at which a scenario will make sense, it's good to just put it there for your reference so that later on when you're designing it, you have a kind of a tentative list of possible scenarios or possible types of scenarios that you may use. And then during the planning, you also decide if your scenarios should be written in the first person or in the third person. Now, this might seem like a very simple decision, and you're right about that. I think for sensitive topics such as sexual harassment, it's recommended that we use the third person. Now, coming to the actual design, as we go through the content, as we spot opportunities for scenarios, we also have to think of the possible situations, the possible characters in those situations. So, if you want your training to be effective and engaging, it pays to spend a little time up front in coming up with believable characters, some character that the learner can relate to. And once you have your characters and your scenarios, you can identify those where you need the subject matter experts' inputs. Now, sometimes the content we use could be so technical, or it could be in such a domain where we don't have too much experience. This is where having a SME to collaborate with you in developing the scenarios, it really works well. And if you have decided, another aspect of design is if you have decided on using branching scenarios, you can review the content and identify all those possible decision points and also list out all the various alternative outcomes based on each choice. Now, the third aspect, the last point here is, I think many of us burnt our fingers when we first got into scenario-based training, when we just started developing the scenarios directly, in the storyboard stage. I'm referring to branching scenarios here. Now, it is a very good practice to map out your entire scenario flow. So something like a blueprint or a wireframe flow outside of your PowerPoint. So even before you get to the storyboarding stage, in your design, it's very important to have all your decision charts, your flow charts, your decision points, and the outcomes and the teaching feedback you want to provide at each outcome. It's important to map it out very clearly. I think there are some tools also to help you do this. If nothing, just jot it down, let this be drawn out on a sheet of paper. It's amazing the level of clarity you get when you just map it out very clearly. And this makes the storyboarding part really clear. And at that point, you know exactly which option leads to which outcome and what you need to do to take it further. Now, coming to the development aspect, develop the scenarios in the tool of your choice, depending on whatever tool your organization is using. So you can develop them using Storyline, Rise, Captivate, or iSpring. And the most important thing to keep in mind in the development stage is to test them out well. Now, although we may have a very clear roadmap of our entire scenarios, have a very clear blueprint, when it comes to development, sometimes branching scenarios can be tricky. So it's very important that we test them again and again before we actually release them to a pilot group. You'll find that a lot of things which you thought would work out uh, actually may not be the best possible choice there. So test out your branching scenarios and make sure that when you're developing your storyboards, you have all the right hyperlinks in place so that you can simulate the actual course in your PowerPoint so that you can actually see the consequences and the various learning paths. So please do keep this in mind because branching scenarios can get slightly tricky, especially if you have decided to go down a couple of levels of decision making. I think so far, I don't know how many of you have. This is a very old example, but there was this very comprehensive, complicated scenario based course created by Kathy Moore. Now, it was on teaching cultural sensitivity to a person in the army who's in some other country uh, negotiating over something. So branching scenarios, I think, can work very effectively, especially in such situations where it's behavioral, cultural sensitivity, soft skills, and so on.